Hi, this is Andy Robinson, the editor of VideoGamesChronicle.com. Before I launched VGC, I worked at Playtonic Games, the developer formed by the former developers of Banjo-Kazooie. To mark the N64 Classic's 25th anniversary, I decided to catch up with some of my former colleagues to discuss its legacy and to cover some previously unheard anecdotes from its development. So here's my chat with lead programmer Chris Sutherland, character artist Steven Mayles, and composer Grant Kirkhope. Enjoy. Obviously, I wanted to catch up with you guys ahead of the big 25 tomorrow. It's the obvious first question is you guys must feel pretty surreal that it's been 25 years ago since you shipped that, and secondly that there's still so much enthusiasm for the game, more than 2 decades later. Anyone pick it up, whoever you want.
Yeah, I mean, so sometimes it still feels like yesterday, and sometimes it really does feel like the whole 25 years. But sometimes, you can remember exactly what you were doing at certain times. How it felt when something went into the game and it was really good and everyone liked it. But then on the other hand, it does feel like a whole lifetime away as well. I don't know if that's the same for everyone else.
Yeah, it still amazes me, to be honest. It's a strange, without putting it in a strange way, but it's that people still care about it, because you think, well, obviously it was important to us at the time, and it did have an importance, but you think, every 5 years or every few years, that people still want to talk about it and celebrate it. And it's always important to me to do that, because at some point I won't be able to remember anything about it anyway.
Can you hear me? Am I
I can hear you all right, yeah. You're a little bit delayed, but you'll do.
Yes, I guess for me, it's like Steve and Chris really. I think you don't know at the time you've made something that good, do you? I mean, you just do it and hope for the best, don't you? You've no idea it's going to last the test of time. So, for the fact it's 25 years, people are still talking about it, it's amazing to me. I felt like 6 months had been gone, So, I don't know. I think we all... And also, I really feel like it was a good time for the team. I think we all sort of gelled together at the right point. We were all mates all together. We went out together. We drank together. We did everything together. So I feel like all that humour that's in the game that everyone talks about, that was just us piss-taking on a daily basis up and down the corridor, wasn't it? It was the same humour that we had amongst ourselves in the game, So I think when you get something like that, it has to be good. It all just kind of bleeds in there,
I mean, that was what I was going to ask you next is what do you think is the secret to that longevity? The fact that, there is still a lot of enthusiasm around it, because, of course, not just, kind of games in general of that era, but even the same company, Rare, put out a lot of very good games. But, above arguably any other, there is still a lot of relevance for this game. I mean, I know what my opinion is. I think it's probably that it has a lot of personality that comes through, as you said, the kind of the personality of the team shines through the game. But what's your take, Steve?
Why am I always the first to answer all these questions? Why am I on the spot?
Well, you do the best answer, and then we just read your answer.
I mean, we were just willing shipmates dancing to Mayles Senior's tune, really. I mean, most of the big decisions, they all came from him. But I'd like to think, we went in our own individual ways, went above and beyond the Call of Duty. I certainly poured, absolutely everything I had into that game, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. People say, no one ever said this, of course, in those days. You're working too many hours. I loved every minute I was there working on that game. Up till midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and we did that quite regular. I wouldn't recommend it now, but at the time, it was great.
I mean, I'll tell you my theory. Obviously, working with you guys in a small team for those years on the ukulele games, and speaking to a lot of game developers now, the sense you get is that the autonomy that you had of those days, working in 10, 15 man teams where you did, to an extent, have some free rein to put your stamp on the project itself, put your personality into the game, that's something that feels really unique to that era. Is that fair, Chris? Or Steve?
I was going to go there. Oh yeah. For me, the autonomy was definitely a big thing. You know, I wouldn't have been able to been there like working away on my own. Well, it was usually me and Ed. If we had to be constantly like, you know, getting everything checked and approved, it was basically, you know, here's a couple of lines description of a character, maybe a funny little picture Greg would draw, and then that was it. You were off, and that was it. It went in the game. You put it in the game yourself, tested all the animations and stuff, and on to the next one. That autonomy was great. I mean, I don't think that'd work now on the sort of project, like a AAA project that if like Banjo was remade now, that wouldn't work just because things take so much longer to make. But in those days, that was a big part of it, sure.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that we'd gone from teams which are probably a quarter or half the size, where we were, there's only a few people on those smaller teams, and those were ones where people would, if you were the only programmer or one of a couple of programmers on that team, the smaller team, then you had to it was up to you to do the work, otherwise it wouldn't get done. So you couldn't kind of go, someone else will do that, or hope that somebody else could take that on. It was just, you had to kind of make things happen. And I suppose that mentality then carried on, because we just built a bigger team with Banjo. And so we carried on with that mentality, I think. So we weren't, and like Steve says, we were kind of just putting stuff in as we thought best, based on the guidance of like Mayles Senior. So it was basically that should go in, let's put that in. We weren't kind of having to test ideas out or anything. We hadn't thought that would be a good idea, really. We just worked in the same way we'd always worked.
Yeah, and for me, it was the first game I'd done by myself. So I'd done GoldenEye before that, but I'd done it with Graham Norgate, right? So this was the first game that I did all the sound effects and all the music, everything you hear is by me. So I didn't really know what I was doing. I'd not done sound effects before. This was the first game I've ever done sound effects on. So, to do that, I just had no idea what I was doing. And you just kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best, don't you? So it's bizarre that it turned out so well musically, I think, and sound effects, because I had no idea what to do.
And also, it was the first time we'd done 3D, and so we didn't really have an idea what we were doing either.
Well, yeah. I mean, we got off to a couple of false starts, though, didn't we? It was a learning process, but we got there in the end.
It was really fascinating. Recently, I got to when I was in Japan earlier this year, I got to kind of sit down with a guy called Imamura-san, who worked on the kind of Star Fox and F-Zero games. He was like kind of the steward on Nintendo side for that. And he actually talked about coming over to Ashby and falling in love with baked beans and English breakfast, and because he would have been the producer on Star Fox Adventures, I suppose. But speaking to him about his career, which was a similar time span to you guys, he touched on a lot of familiar topics, like about how he kind of missed the autonomy of working in small teams on like Zelda: A Link to the Past, where he could like create a boss character and then go off and do something else, and kind of see his fingerprints in lots of different areas of the game, which kind of compared to kind of modern games, he said was very different. Is that something that you felt?
I like, yeah, but I
think we've lost him to the north. Is he
back?
There you are. Back. Yeah, we got a little blip there.
No, I was just going to say that. I just kind of felt like that we'd talk about something in the morning and then do it by the afternoon. There was no like producer thing that got in the way of it all. It was just what we thought was best. So, like Steve said before, you just did your own thing, right? And just stuck it in the game. And then if no one said it was crap, it would just stay in the game. There was. I really think that you've lost a bit of that kind of. I don't know what you want to call it. Flying by the seat of your pantsness.
I guess maybe as things have become a bit more professional, you've lost some of that human touch, maybe. Some of that, maybe Banjo-Kazooie today, a lot of the content would have been reviewed in all hands meetings.
I'm sure that sort of, working environment and practice still exists on small teams, where you just have to get stuff done really quickly because of probably budget constraints. But definitely, if there was a Banjo remake, that working practice wouldn't work anyway. I don't think.
Yeah, I think the closest you come today to seeing that kind of working practice is probably in a game jam or something, or an indie team with maybe a few people that they're probably building things the same kind of way. You're not if you're an indie team, you're not concepting up something and then reviewing it. You're just building it and putting it in. And it's easier, obviously, if you're in a room with several other people, then you can overhear what's going on. If you're in a company of 100 people and working on one project, then you have no idea what somebody in some far off studio is doing. So you're reliant on some other communication system to tell you what's going on.
So
we just had tea at 3.
Steve, what are your earliest memories of kind of in the early days of the project when you were formulating the idea? I mean, obviously everyone knows about Project Dream, everyone knows that story, but what comes to mind when you think of that early kind of gestation period when you were kind of stumbling in the dark?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go back to Dream really, because it had the boy character Edson. It wasn't really going anywhere. The hardware, the N64 just couldn't handle such an ambitious project. And I think we'd had this kind of boy on screen for like a year, and people were getting fed up with him, as that sort of thing tends to happen in development. And I don't know where it came from. It probably came from Tim, who decided, we should have an animal character instead. And he suggested a bear. And I remember he'd already, sort of between projects after DKC2, he got me rendering different bears. So I don't know whether he kind of always had this kind of plan for a bear, which, I mean, Tim did look at things in a very long-term way, so it wouldn't surprise me. But I remember, doing a couple of high-res NURBS models of bears, so I guess they were the sort of start of Banjo, really.
Wasn't there famously a rabbit involved, almost?
Well, if Ed was here, he could tell you about the rabbit. The rabbit was, I don't know. I don't ever remember some kind of, it's a competition. Let's see who can make the main character. Will it be a bear or will it be a rabbit? I don't remember it like that. I just remember Ed doing a rabbit with a wooden sword, and it did go in the game. I remember it running around, but it didn't last any longer than a day, I don't think. But in terms of, again, I can't remember where the clothing came from, because it was always from the start. He had yellow shorts and a blue backpack. I can't remember, but it wouldn't surprise me if Tim did come in and just say, it's got to have yellow shorts, or it's got to have a blue backpack. I can't exactly remember. But I know there wasn't really any kind of trying different sort of clothing or kind of accessories or items or any of that sort of thing. It was kind of the yellow shorts and the blue backpack from the start. And then obviously how Kazooie, you might know how Kazooie got added, how we needed a double jump and we put the wings in, we needed a fast run, we put the legs in, and it was literally just, we've got legs and wings, we might as well have a whole character in there. And that's how the whole buddy duo came about, by completely by accident.
Chris,
what do you talk? Am I still here?
No, you're still there. Talk away.
All right.
Anyone else have any memories from the early days of the project?
I was just going to say, my earliest memory is us all. Am I still there?
Yeah, you're still here.
Yeah, still there.
My earliest memories is us all getting trooped across to the Conker Barn when, we've been doing the Dream thing for ages, not getting anywhere. And then Tim said, right, we need to make a proper platform game. We need to do it the way they're doing it. And we all got taken across to the Conker Barn and showed what they had that first level. It was amazing. And we were all mega depressed. We're oh God, yeah, that's great. And then he said to Steve Hurst, right, get a level knocked up with massive polygons everywhere. So it's a lot easier to run, all that kind of thing. And we'll just start from there all over again. And I was like, I've written 107 pieces of music for Dream, you know, and then it was like, yeah, they're all getting chucked out the window. He's got to start again now, you know. And I feel like we all had that thing where it was like, Conker looks great, ours is a piece of shit. Make something like that. And that was it. That was it.
Where did Mario 64 come into that? Because I'm assuming that must have come out at some point, and that was such an impactful game that somebody somewhere inside of Rare, either the Conker team or the Banjo team, must have seen that and gone, "Oh shit, you know, that's the direction we need to head in."
Yeah, I feel like Conker, but I think Conker did go in that direction straight away. We didn't. So they had that whole platform thing. That's what they were going to do. We weren't doing that. We were doing like an RPG sort of thing, right? You know, so I guess more Zelda-y. So, you know, we weren't thinking about that at all until Tim said, right, enough of this. It's going to be another platform game. And ironically, we beat Conqueror out in the end. But, you know, it was just a complete change. And so that's my plus, you know, when in Tiki where I was music saying, right, you're finishing on GoldenEye, you're starting the Banjo team. That was it. I just got you're finishing right today, no more GoldenEye, you're on that team, and I never got a chance to finish it. I just had to go shafted off to the other team. That was it.
Yeah, the first time we saw Mario 64 was in Japan in 1995, so that's going back quite a way. But there was never any, you know, we've got to make a 3D platformer. Like Grant said, it very much was Tim and Greg wanted to make this kind of like this grand RPG type adventure. And then after that, it wasn't straight onto the 3D platform. We kind of had this kind of middle stage where it was like a 2.5D sort of platformer where you'd run along this kind of linear path. Yeah, there was like depth and stuff, but it was still running along a linear path. And we were desperate to get it running at 30 frames per second, and we just couldn't do that. And I think that was the point where we thought, oh God, you know, we've got to change everything. You know, we changed the game into some kind of halfway house between platform and adventure, and it doesn't have to run at 30 frames per second. And as soon as we had that kind of mandate, and Steve Hurst made that first sort of temple level, that you could run around and jump, it was like, you know, a bit of, yeah, you know, this is what we should be doing.
Chris, that's a fair point that Steve brings up there, that obviously it's forgotten that in those days it was a real kind of battle of, you know, compromises between art and technology a lot of the time.
Yeah, I mean, my memory of it was that we were doing, for what we were doing with Dream, was kind of almost like we were going from Super Nintendo, where we had these amazing detailed images on SNES, and then there was the realization that on N64 it was all going to look like comparatively a blocky, shoddy mess, because you didn't have that resolution and that detail, and it was like, oh, how can we get that? And we said, so there was this idea that arose, which was we'd have all these planes that looked nice and detailed, and then you'd arrange these together and it would look amazing, but then the system just couldn't cope with that. It didn't work out, and so we ended up, like Grant said, it was a case of going, you know, we were going down this path, but Conker team had already tried the alternative route, and actually what we were thinking it was going to be a bit too blocky. It looked completely fine, looked really good, so it was a kind of an eye-opener moment to say, just like you said, just do this effectively. So that was kind of turned things around, and like Steve said, then we've kind of had this in-between step, and then we then went, let's just do the whole thing the same way, because it looked like you could get the performance you needed out of it like that.
Grant, you mentioned you came straight over from GoldenEye, is that right?
Right.
So from your perspective, you'd already kind of learnt a lot of the quirks of kind of getting music, squeezing it into a cartridge on the N64 hardware. Did that make things a lot easier, or was it still a bit of a shock?
Well, it was still a shock because Tim wanted it to be so high quality. Like, he wanted everything to be like better quality than anything else. So I remember having to try to create a string section, you know, and all that kind of stuff on the N64 hardware, which was like ridiculously hard. And, you know, he wanted the quality to be so high, I don't think we were ever going to get there. And realizing that you had to resample stuff down from 44.1 kilohertz to like 16 kilohertz or 11 kilohertz, or, you know, I mean, Chris knows, we used to fight over all the audio stuff all the time, you know, to try to get stuff to work. And fight with Mackie to get the bloody channel fade thing working wasn't very good either. So that was a nightmare. So, I mean, and Tim and Greg were obsessed with the Monkey Island games, and so they loved the way that iMuse system worked on the LucasArts games, and all the way it all fit together, and all the tunes would change, and more as you wandered around the level. So you wanted that in the N64 game. And I had no idea how that worked. So I just had to make it up as I went along, and it kind of thought it must be like this, something like this, and I think Chris kind of got it working, and then Mackie sort of took over, putting it in once he knew how to do it. But I mean, it was just, so I knew a little bit, but I mean, it was still my very first. I just remember after that, going from GoldenEye to Banjo, I remember Tim was one late at night, came to see me and said, "All right, Grant," he said, "You're going to be doing all this game by yourself now, all the sound effects, all the music. Don't F it up." That was the last. That I just went, "Oh yeah, no pressure, I've not had any video like 5 minutes, like that."
How did you? How did the? I mean, obviously the game's famous for its the kind of gobbledygook character voices. How did that come about? How did you put those together? If we can get you back from your northern Wi-Fi.
No, but we did. Am I still here?
You're here now. Yeah, you're
still there. You're back now. Yeah.
No, but we just decided that because Tim wanted to voice acting, didn't he? And we were all like, "How the bloody hell are we going to do that?" So I just decided to try and use the sound effects as voice samples. But it took a little bit of messing around to understand how it would sound even remotely bearable, So I was like giving it, you give it a random pitch between two values, and if it was too big, it would sound funny because the human voice is quite monotonic, isn't it? And then we realised that that would work, and we realised when the text was going along the screen, it sounded weird when the voice didn't quite match the syllables. So we worked out that, I think me and Chris did this. So we worked out that if you came to the end of a syllable, you should stop the sample and start a new sample, like that. And so it had that.
I remember this when we were trying to recreate on ukulele, right? And it was a nightmare.
Yeah, it's funny to make it sound even bearable. So you have to make it sound rhythmical to make it sound like the human voice. If it was all the same rhythm, it wouldn't work.
It's almost as unbearable as trying to listen to you right now, mate.
Well, it's bloody whippy Wi-Fi. It's shite, isn't it? What can I say?
Try turning your video off. Maybe the audio will be a little bit better. It should be like a turn off. Just switch your video on a big blue
Is it off now?
And then try talking to us now. Is that better?
The camera's off now.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, now I think we can hear you a bit better.
Am I better?
Well, we don't know because we can't see you freezing all over the place.
So why did I get to?
Oh, there you go. There you're better. That sounds better. Yeah, we'll stick it like that, and we'll just replace you with a nice, pretty picture. Can you?
All right.
Can you, Chris? Can you talk a bit about the Stampers and how what their kind of their impact on this project was? Because not a lot of people talk about them. Obviously, they're very secretive people these days, anyway. But very little, I think, gets said for just how hands-on they were with a lot of these projects. I mean, obviously it's been talked about, even concepts. Steve mentioned that, they asked him to kind of create a bear, and I know with, in DKC days, they kind of laid out a lot of the early levels and things like that. So could you talk a bit about how impactful they were on kind of coming up with this game, rather than just being your typical, kind of company directors?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly in the Dream phase, Tim was on the team, from what I remember. Steve will probably remember more because he's probably in the room near him. But I remember him being on the team pretty much all the time, and he would often be popping in and asking us things, or whether it was asking me to do voices or whether it was code things. And then when we moved, because in Banjo, he was also on the team quite a lot of time there as well. Perhaps less so for Chris Stamper, because he was probably covering other things. Chris Stamper you'd actually built, I don't know if anybody knew that he'd actually, and probably more again for DKC stuff, he'd actually built like his graphics tablet drawing tool, and he'd written the software for that. So, I mean, he was doing other things, but I would say Tim would be more involved, and he'd be talking to Greg directly more day to day than Chris would. Steve probably remembers more than me.
I mean, I'm sure they were involved more behind the scenes, but for the projects I did with Tim, with DKC, he was massively hands-on with that. He did probably like 80% of the backgrounds, and was a real driving force in the design as well. Massively hands-on for DKC, but less so for Banjo, as I remember. I mean, the hours we did, I'd have noticed if he was in the banjo block, as we called it, a lot, and he didn't seem to be around as much as I thought he'd be. I guess that just speaks that he trusted the team and the direction, the way things were going.
And trusted the Golden Boys, who made DKC.
Well, we tried.
Grant, what can you tell me about the famous? Obviously you've worked on the game for a bit at this point, and I'm assuming your big first E3 was 1997, something like that. What can you tell me about that E3? Because I remember it sounded like quite a memorable one.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
No, that was absolutely spectacular because the whole team got to go, right? So we were massively proud of the game. We really, massively proud of it. We thought we'd got something fantastic, but we knew there was no chance of it coming out for that Christmas. Not a hope in hell. And I remember we were at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles, and there was a meeting.
Important caveat for this anecdote that you guys knew it didn't have a chance in hell of coming out, but did Nintendo of America know this?
No one else did except us. And we had this massive meeting set up with Howard Lincoln down in the depths of the Biltmore Hotel. It was him and that Scott Hochberg, who was Joel Hochberg's son. It was kind of inconsequential, but Howard Lincoln we all thought, oh God, we're going to get a right rocket here, So he just walked in and said, "My name is Howard Lincoln. I'm the so and so of Nintendo. We have $5 billion in the bank and no debts." And then sat down. And we were all like, "Oh God, this is going to go terribly." And he just proceeded to lay out. So, guys, I just want you to understand that we've secured 20 million advertising for this thing in September, and 40 million for this, and just all these massive giant figures about how they've reserved advertising for Banjo-Kazooie. And then, so just to make sure that you understand that missing Christmas is really not an option, and we were like, "Oh yeah, Howard, no trouble at all. We're definitely going to make it. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, don't worry about it." All the time, knowing there's not a chance we're ever going to make it in hell, And I remember Graham Smith, one of the members of the team, felt so bad he went laid down in his room because he was like so nervous, he was so like nearly passing out with fright. He went completely pale. And he was sat in his room for the entire night worrying about it. We were like, well, what are we going to do? That's the what's going to be. It's not coming out. That's all there is to it. And so we was like, yeah, don't worry, Howard, it's going to be great. And then went back to Twycross and let Tim and Chris handle it and tell them, actually, it's not going to come out at all. We're not going to make it,
What are your memories of that E3, Chris?
I do remember that talk. My memory, I seem to remember there's Grant. You might remember there's. Was there a bit where it was kind of, there was a talk about, and this is how it works with marketing, and this is how we have this timeline, and it was kind of, I don't know if it was directly said, but there was this kind of inference that if we didn't deliver, then people might lose their job somewhere down the line.
I feel like there was
not us, but somebody would.
Yeah, Bob at Walmart or something like that. One. This fictional guy who was going to lose his job if we didn't deliver. That's tried to guilt us into it.
The guys we've hired to wear the Banjo and Kazooie costumes will be out of a job this Christmas if you don't deliver.
Yeah, but then it all happened. So when we got back and they told Nintendo we weren't going to make it, and we had the racing game, which was like RC Pro Am Racing, whatever it was, upstairs from us, Chris Stamper's game. And Nintendo had said, look, stick the Donkey Kong characters in that game, and we'll have that instead. So they got all advertising budget. Diddy Kong Racing, it got named. They got all our budget for advertising, sold an absolute shed load of games. we were all right, miserable, going, oh God, completely missed the boat because they all bought sports cars, and we were all like, oh God, look at us, our games, all that was supposed to be ours. We didn't get any of it.
What else do you remember from that E3, Steve?
I just
Any good parties?
We might have had a few drinks, but I just remember it was a real kind of show of strength from Rare, because we had you walked in there. It was at E3 when you had a game on show, and you go past as a what do you call it? When you're showing the games on the floor.
The booth.
Booth.
No. What was the phrase? If you're exhibitor, that's it. You have your little exhibitor badge. You could, you go past all these massive queues, and you go in, and there's like hardly anyone there, and it'd be so exciting just to go and see, what stand like Nintendo have created for your game. And in '97, there's like this massive Mumbo statue. It looked really cool. And the Banjo stand was in the middle. On the right was the GoldenEye stand, and on the left was like the Conker stand. So it's like this massive show of strength from Rare.
I'm guessing, Grant, this isn't the E3 with the Miyamoto encounter.
I think it is.
No, no, it wasn't. That's when we went to Atlanta at that time. The Atlanta one, I think. It was in Atlanta. It was in Atlanta.
I thought they were all in Atlanta in those days.
This is Atlanta. '97 was Atlanta.
No, it wasn't. No, the first Banjo-Kazooie show was definitely LA.
No, it's this one. It is this one. You just can't remember.
It's blocked out on his mind.
No, it's this one.
It was the one where we went to that museum and George Benson was playing as a gig.
Yeah, this one.
Was it?
Yeah, '97.
I'll have to look it up. I feel like, well, get your Google out and Google it.
Well, you're gonna have to tell the anecdote for our readers now.
We didn't go in '96 because there was no game. We didn't go in '98 because the game was literally out. It was '97. You're wrong.
I think by '99 it was in LA. Yeah.
'97. Yes, it was.
So what year was it in Atlanta?
When it started, the first E3 was what, 95, 96?
Was it? I didn't know that.
Because it was CES, wasn't it? CES transitioned into E3. I don't go as far back to have been there personally, but E3 evolved from CES, right?
Yeah, it was when we went for DKC. That was CES in Chicago. That was '94. So I guess maybe the first E3 could have been '95.
I thought it was 95, 96, something like that. Yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, Grant, for the listeners, you're going to have to tell the anecdote now.
Well, we used to have this thing at one of the many.
The headlines have already been written about this story. It's old news.
But it was all to do with how we were as a team, right? So it was a thing where when it was your birthday, you had to bring a cake in for the rest of the team, right? We always did that for everybody, right? And then in the summertime, we always used to wear shorts, right? Right. So it used to be like known as cake slap shorts down. So you'd be holding your cake on your plastic, on your paper plate. Somebody would come along and hit the plate underneath of the cake and go into the air. And then while you were shocked from that, they'd pull your shorts down, right?
By this someone, you mean it was always you, Grant? Nobody else did it?
Well, it was something like that. And then, so it was a bit of a thing. We had to wear our shorts super tight because they'd be pulled down by somebody in the block at some point in the day in the summertime. So we were in the bloody wherever it was, E3. I still don't know. Anyway, but I remember Miyamoto was there. I remember Tim talking to him and doing a bit of Japanese. And I just thought, God, wouldn't it be great to say hello to Mr. Miyamoto? Because we're all plastered because you get like loads of free booze, don't you? So I remember going across to him and sort of saying, me composer Banjo-Kazooie, or, to try to kind of, and he kind of smiled, and then I was drunk, so that was it. And then I went to the toilet, and George Andres, who was one of the assistant designers, was at the urinal taking a pee. So I thought it would be hilarious to go up behind him and pull his trousers down while he was taking a pee, right? But George had got he's quite strong as George, and he held onto his waistband super tight. So I was really tugging on his trousers, trying to get them down. And just as I looked to my right, Mr. Miyamoto was just stood there right next to me, looking at me, going, sort of like, looking, because I was on my knees at this point, trying to get George's trousers down. And of course, he just looked at me, and I didn't know what to do. I just sort of went, and just kind of wandered off back into the room. So I haven't talked to Mr. Miyamoto since then. So I don't know if that's, I don't know what that could possibly mean, but that's that.
Especially considering you've actually worked on 2 Mario games since. That's quite damning, potentially.
Those wacky banjo, those wacky English banjo guys, that's what he was thinking.
That's what he's thinking, yeah. Funny enough, like when for the first time they showed Mario Rabbids, they all went and had a picture taken with him when I was there, and they didn't invite me in.
Probably because Miyamoto remembered he didn't have a strong belt on or something.
Anyway, that was that.
So obviously you've gone back to England, and to work on the game after your delay. What's the anecdote I remember about your ritual, your daily ritual, your tea ritual, Chris?
Well, this is more a kind of Grant and Steve, Greg and Ed thing.
Everyone else.
I would pop in sometimes to see what was going on, but it was mainly those guys and their ritual. So I think it's probably best for one of them to describe. I don't even know how it started. I think it's probably Grant who started off, because I think Grant, you were kind of obviously in a different room because of the audio had to be done elsewhere. So in order for you to keep up to date, there had to be a way for you to get information out of people, and was that how it started?
When I was first in the banjo block, my room was opposite Greg's, right?
Oh yes, it was, yeah.
Yeah, so and he just said, look, just to let you know, we have tea at 3. And he had this bit of paper on the wall that had the schedule. It was like Grant Monday, Greg Tuesday, Grant Wednesday, Greg Thursday, Grant Friday. So I got 3 teas, he got 2 teas. You had to take turns making it. And that's how it kind of started. And then it just kind of developed into this. Tea at 3 became a half an hour affair, didn't it? Like a 3/4 of an hour affair of just taking the piss out of each other, and telling stupid stories and try to get someone's shorts down or whatever, and just the usual, really. Every day.
No memories of tea at 3, Steve?
Well, we in those days there wasn't really the kind of well-being around. Leave your desk and wander off, have a stretch, etc. All of that about the mental well-being and stuff. So we worked really hard all day, and this sort of tea at 3 was a time where we could just chat about stuff that, well, so sometimes it wasn't. I mean, most of the time it wasn't to do with the game, but sometimes I guess it invariably crept in. When you get a load of people together, then a decision could be made. But I do remember it not being about the game. And in later years, when we were kind of running low on topics, we had Greg had this wheel made. It was called it was like the Topo wheel or something for topics. So it was like this Wheel of Fortune type wheel that it was really shit. But you just spun the wheel, and whatever it landed on, that was the topic for tea at 3. But needless to say, it didn't last long. And if it landed on a bad topic, we'd just keep spinning it till we got onto a good topic. So it was fairly pointless.
Can you recall any of the topics?
No, I can't.
You don't, or you can't.
I do remember another key factor of not so much tea at 3, though I probably did get on at that time, was the sound effects that came through the indie machines. I can never forget those, because that all struck me as, you think nowadays if this could happen, it would be there'd be an uproar. Because the design of these machines was such that I could connect to your machine, and I could do things like I could grab the screenshot of your machine without you knowing. I could log into your machine while you're there. You're in another room. I can remotely connect, grab a screenshot, see what you're working on, or I can actually, what Grant discovered, you can play sound effects through that other person's machine, and increase the volume so it's really loud. So they just suddenly get this max volume burst of sound effects coming out. Yeah.
Yes, because when I was working on GoldenEye, when I was on GoldenEye, I was in this little chicken shed by myself on a night time, late at night. And Martin Hollis, who was good at the indie stuff and the Unix, all that, and he worked out you could copy the sound effect to the guest account on your machine, and if you type in a bit of code, it would play it full volume. And so one night late at night, he copied a lot of monkey noises because he used to call me Monkey Boy, right? He copied loads of monkey noises to my machine and played them out my speakers at full blast, and I nearly had a heart attack because we were just down the road from Twycross Zoo, and I really thought, God, there's a monkey in my room. A monkey's escaped. I'm going to get, So once that happened a few times, I was like, oh, I can do this. And so I just copied loads of sound effects to Stephen Ed's machines, like, constantly, and just play them at full blast out of the machines. And just became this. I mean, we actually created, lots of, music and stuff that was, specific to people. So Ed would have a tune about him, and Steve would get a tune with some lyrics about him, and it got a bit like that. So it got quite in depth back at one point where people had their own theme tunes that were a complete piss take, created by me, copied onto the machines and played it full blast at some point during the day, just went like that.
So coming back to Chris, obviously you've come back from the E3, you've delayed the game. I don't think I've ever heard you speak about what the final stretch of Banjo-Kazooie was like. Kind of, obviously we know that finishing games, everything can kind of come together at the last minute. It can be stressful. So what was it like? What were your memories of kind of finishing up the game those last few months?
I just remember it being a ton of bugs that we had to fix, and most of them were to do with the player, which I was working on. So, but I was kind of used to that, but it just seemed like a never-ending list of problems that had to be fixed. It was probably even more on the second game, on the sequel. But I guess it's just those last stages, because you're just constantly just trying to fix things and improve things as you go. So it's a bit of a blur. I don't remember much of the specifics, really.
Steve, do you have any memories of those final few months?
I mean, graphics, characters and animation in particular always have an easy ride at the end of the game, like compared to code.
You're usually told to stop, right?
Yeah, who've got to fix stuff and everything. So we'd probably just be doing a bit of play testing, and apart from that, we'd be badgering Greg about what was coming next. So very often we'd be thinking about or even creating stuff for the next game, if we were that efficient.
And I suppose with this game in particular, it obviously literally announced the sequel at the end of the game. So I suppose that's unique from the point of view that you were in a position to kind of move straight over to thinking about that.
Yeah, it's nice to have something you can move straight onto. So yeah, we'd be doing that, just either play testing or definitely had a lot easier time of it than poor Chris did. What
about you, Grant? Did you get all the music in time, or?
Yeah, easy. I think I was like Steve. I think you're pretty done towards the end, apart from bits and pieces. But I do remember that whole jigsaw thing got brought in right quite near the end for Graham Smith. That bit when you stand on the podium, throw the piece in, and then and Tim had that idea, let's make it a jigsaw, and it all got linked together with the jiggies and all the rest of it, kind of thing. And I think I'm sure that came in quite late, and Graham had a massive panic about getting that done in time. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, and I seem to remember as well there was, and maybe I'm getting mixed up with the second game, but I don't think I am. There was also the suggestion that we could make it multiplayer as well. I'm sure that came in as well.
Yeah, maybe yeah.
That was another surprise request towards the end. We could add multiplayer.
Yeah, there's no time. There was a 4-way split, wasn't there, for like a week or so. I mean, it didn't last long before it was. It was like a few weeks before the end. It was crazy.
I do remember that the final battle with Grunty, Reese was super slow at getting that finished, wasn't he? And I remember the whole big ginginator bit at the end. Like I was moaning at Reese, seemed to be day in, day out to try and get stuff finished to get that final battle done. Because I felt like that was late. I felt at the end. I felt he was slow getting that done.
Well, it was his first. Was it his first game?
It was my first game.
Hang on, you've just done GoldenEye.
You've just done GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Well, first game to myself. First game to myself.
Give him a break.
You never gave him a break. You kept saying, "Play that sound over Dad's machine." That effect we had to say, it went, "Do some work." Just play "Do Some Work" over and over again at Reese's machine. Because he'd sit there, but didn't he? Be really slow, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you were working, super hard yourself, and you thought other people maybe could have worked harder, obviously in a pressurised environment, you kind of do want everyone to kind of, go the extra mile, don't you? I guess, but.
Yeah, but I remember I had to rewrite Mumbo's Mountain and Treasure Trove Cove very near the end because Chris Stamper decided he didn't like them. So I had to redo those levels.
Well, if you'd done them right in the first place, you wouldn't have had to rewrite them, sure.
Charming.
I seem to. I remember thinking that it was odd that none of you could ever remember much about your old stuff. But now that I can't remember half the things that we did on the ukulele games, I can kind of emphasise, and that was only, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So obviously, finishing up, 25 years, there's still a lot of love for the franchise. There's merchandise. There's more merchandise than there ever was, kind of when it first came out in the 90s and the early noughties. Why is it taking so long for the series to come back? I mean, there's still not been a game, a Banjo-Kazooie game that you guys didn't work on, and you've not been at Rare for well over a decade. Why is it taking so long for this series to come back, despite the fact there seems to be so much love for it? Steve?
I mean, obviously, I can't speak for Greg, but he's really the custodian of the franchise of Banjo, and he doesn't really like to look back and sort of tread over old ground. So I don't think he's ever been kind of bothered about doing anything else with the franchise, really. He'd rather move on to new experiences. As far as he's concerned, I think he's been there, done that. It turned out great. Let's go and do something else now.
Go on,
yeah, I think Greg and Tim don't look like looking back. They want to look ahead. The pair of them are very similar. But I've always felt about a Banjo 3 that, and I really don't think it'll ever happen. But I feel like you'd have to get a team that got the humour that we had back then. That's not hard to. That's hard to replicate. That is. You get to find somebody that would have the passion, that could get it and get the humour, which I think is not easy. And I think Rare would be open to somebody if they with the return of the right team. But I really don't feel like the team exists. And also, I'm not convinced that the audience is there either. I don't feel like there's that many Banjo fans out there.
Even, of course, you were at the epicenter of the kind of the big Smash Brothers announcement. I mean, obviously you worked on the music. You were working on a Mario game at the time. Surely that must have seemed absolutely huge for Banjo at the time. So it's surprising to hear you say that.
It was. I mean, the whole Smash Brothers thing was spectacular. It really was. I mean, I think we all the team that worked on that had a tear in their eye when Banjo turned up in Smash Brothers. I think we all really felt that. I know Steve felt that. I know Chris did. And I think that we all felt the same way. It was just an unbelievable release of emotion. Like seeing all those people crying on videos on YouTube, was super heartwarming, and we all felt it. And it was that's a once in a lifetime for me event when that happened. But I still feel like, is there that multi-million-dollar thing existing for Banjo-Kazooie? And I'm not convinced it is.
Chris, what's your take, mate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I think similar to what Grant's saying, I mean, for a long time there was a doubt whether there was any audience for that type of game. I mean, obviously there's some audience, but is there enough to justify, the kind of scale of these games now that you would need if you were, I mean, I'm speculating, but if you were to do a first party game, you could have several hundred people working on this game. Are you going to recoup that amount of money that they've spent on a platformer? I mean, obviously Nintendo do well with their platformers, but that's Nintendo, and they're kind of often the exception to the rule. So I suppose that's the big question. And the character itself and the characters, like we've seen with Smash, they do have, as people have a love for them, but do they have a love for that game? And if you brought out a different kind of game, would you be back to a kind of nuts and bolts thing where people are like, oh, but that's not the game I was expecting? I don't know. It's a difficult one, isn't it? I kind of still hopeful that something will appear at some point, and we'll all be proved wrong.
I do feel sometimes like we kind of exist in a little Banjo-Kazooie bubble sometimes, where it sounds like it's a great big noise, but how big that bubble is, I don't know.
Yeah.
It sounds big when you're inside the bubble, like we all are.
Yeah.
Especially on my Twitch, I can see there's a lot of love for the game and all that, but how big is that? Big is that bubble? Outside that kind of bubble, is there anybody else that's interested?
I mean, obviously, I'm somewhat within the bubble. Obviously, having worked with you guys at Platonic, but whenever we write about the game, it blows up. It does. I mean, from my perspective, there does seem to be interest. I mean, I don't know what kind of return they need on this stuff, but obviously you have companies like First for Figures who make big, expensive, premium, statues for franchises like Mario and Street Fighter and Sonic and Mega Man and things like that. They make tons of Banjo statues. They make very, very niche Banjo statues. They're currently making Bee Banjo and Croc Banjo and things like that. So I mean, I look at that and think that it must be doing okay. I mean, obviously, outside of the resources that are required, the risk to make a new game, were you surprised not to see at least some kind of remaster this year for this anniversary? Because obviously Crash and Spyro, comparable franchises have had very, very successful remasters recently that did well.
Yeah, I mean, I've said before that would be the way to do it, wouldn't it? I think I said during the release of Banjo and Smash that. Because obviously it takes so much money to make like a brand new top end game that the sensible thing to do would be some kind of remaster, just sort of test the water, see if the audience is there. But I think importantly it would have to come out on the on the Nintendo platform as well.
Yeah, and also when you see those people that are making those Unreal versions of the model, the levels up in Unreal, it looks amazing. Like, you could see how a remaster could be really fantastic. To even redo the music, redo everything. It would be pretty spectacular, and it would look amazing. And I think that would do well. Because like the Crash stuff did well, but when they brought out the new Crash game, it didn't do so well, right? So, I wonder. And I've got to say, because I would say this, but having worked with Ubisoft Milan on the two Mario games, I really believe that they could make a great Banjo game. I've said it to them a couple of times. I mean, I don't think they're interested, but I really feel like they've got that passion that I felt like we had in those days at Rare. I didn't think I'd meet anybody else ever that had the passion, but I really feel they have, and I feel like they've got a bit of that Rare quality that we had back then. So I think they could do it. I don't think they ever will, but I feel like if anybody that I know, that's the first team I bumped into over all these years that I felt could do it.
Cool. Thanks for spending the time with me this evening. It's great to catch up. Have you guys got any parting messages on the 25th anniversary? Any parting thoughts, Chris?
Other than I would hope to see whoever it is that does it, I would hope that somebody's going to bring out something like some kind of sequel or some kind of the next in line game. At least before a point where I can still remember that the first one existed. At least before then, but hopefully sooner. So yeah, I am hopeful, but I would share the skepticism of the other folks here as well. That is it going to happen? Is the people who are in charge of the money, are they confident enough to be able to put their money on the table and make that decision? I hope so. So I'd like to see that. Yeah, but let's keep our fingers crossed.
Steve, parting thoughts?
Well, if there ever was a new game, nobody'd be interested in us anymore. It's always like, on to the new thing, Nobody bothered about the old Banjo boys, so maybe it's just as well there hasn't been another one. And also, I've spent absolutely bloody ages drawing a piece of art for Twitter tomorrow for the 25th.
Today, at the time of publish.
Oh, today.
It's on screen now.
Yeah, but I think for me, I I do think that we should all be involved if a new game ever happened in some capacity. I feel like it couldn't be done without us. I really believe that. I feel there'd have to have some injection from us somewhere, just along the way, just to inject, and especially on the humour side. Like I feel like the humour came from all of us, not just from Greg or me or Steve or Chris, but from all of us on that team. And I think,
no one's going to be interested in us old timers anymore, Grant. You're deluded now.
I think we could be there somewhere.
I can offer them this.
Have we
They
gone
can't use that.
55 minutes without a banjo voice?
We've not requested it, have
No,
we?
well, that's a good way to serenade us off, Chris. Go on, do a bit of banjo and kazooie.
Whee!
Very good. Thanks very much, guys. Cheers.
Uminaka.